Jason Voorhees is the ultimate adventurer. Now, I say that, and this is going to require some unpacking. Some of you guys are like, yeah, I get it, because Jason Voorhees is a serial killer, and fundamentally a lot of role players are just serial killers. And yeah, that's true. But there's more to this. It's not as simple as that. Like, it is true that there's not a whole lot of difference between an elf with a longsword and Jason with a machete if all you're doing is going room from room and chopping up live creatures for having morals that you disagree with. Like, the GM doesn't usually go into great detail. When you walk into a room and there's like 4 orcs inside, he doesn't be like, yeah, you stabbed and the guts fall out of the one orc and the other orc's going, run, Bork, run, you his family. You know, usually the orcs say nothing. They have what I call suicide goblin mentality, where they don't seem to care if any of them live or die. They just fight to the death, and that's it. And that's actually the thing that really makes a typical role-playing campaign with your bog standard role players different from a slasher film. In a slasher film, the people that Voorhees is killing, that like they care about each other and whether or not they live or they die. You know, like they're on vacation, they're there to have fun. So if you imagine like chasing a group of 6 orcs all around a dungeon and they are trying to stop you but they can't, like that would be more of a slasher film. If you imagine a slasher film where all the protagonists got together and decided to fight Jason Voorhees like in a fair fight, they got in rows with like, I don't know, knives and daggers, and they were like, all right, to the death then, Jason. The film would be over in 5 minutes, and Jason would win, which is how it works in these kinds of war game role-playing games. It doesn't make a good film, and in my opinion, it doesn't make a very fun role-playing game, but some people will do this for like hours and hours and hours, just, you know, rinse and repeating that formula, and they're like, that was a blast. I don't understand those people, like, I can't fix you. But these lines of thought, although I can't really bring them to the murder hobo roleplay groups, it does get me thinking about concepts that I want to explore and that I want to play in games that have a little bit better of a narrative bent. And why I think it works, if you care about the game world and the people in it. So the first thing I did with this is I invented a character. I named him Hearn, and essentially he's just Jason Voorhees. So to start off, for preface, I really don't like D&D. I find it very restrictive. I don't think it's a very fun system. It's really negligent about skills. The D20 system means that your rolls don't really have any qualitative value. The level system is confounding. You have to start at level 1 or level 2 and then work up in these packages, which is awkward if you want it to be a complete character to start with. In fact, the D20 system is so bad for creativity and it's so restrictive that sometimes if you just take a player away from that, they become a better player just like that, because they're suddenly not pigeonholed into a lot of like really gamey things. And this is relevant because Hearn is a concept that I was thinking of for a D&D game. I do play in a D&D game where the GM sometimes lets me design a character in Hero and then import back to D&D, because Hero is flexible enough that I can do that. I find that a D&D character is 125 points at level 1, and then every level is about 25 points. Now, I still have to design everything with my hand tied behind my back because Hero offers so much flexibility that D&D then takes a giant dump on. So it's like, oh, I could get extra turns, or I get armor and things like that. And 5th edition, for example, just doesn't do armor. It does armor class and da-da-da-da. But at any rate, this game is currently at 7th level. All the player characters are level 7, which by my estimate puts you at about 300 points for a hero character. And that should have you punching up at the level of, like, Wolverine or Spider-Man or Jean Grey, you know, like, pretty super, but not like the top-of-the-line superheroes. Or, if you like, Jason Voorhees probably could be about 300 points. Actually, he's probably a little bit cheaper because aside from being super durable, he really isn't all that super. Like, he can't fly or shoot lasers out of his eyes. That would really change the game for those kids in the woods. Now, another reason I was thinking about Jason Voorhees is because the D&D system, although theoretically you should be on the level of Spider-Man or whatever, and maybe that sounds right for 7th level, a lot of your character points are going into HP. And honestly, I sort of hate that, because if you look at how the level system works, it bounces around, and occasionally it's just giving you trash to make it feel like you've gained something. It's like, you get Uncanny Dodge at 5th level, and you can use your reaction to half the damage you take from one attack. And people will say, oh, that's a perfectly good skill, but, like, you get to use it once per round because it requires a reaction, and it's kind of like I don't know, is that really that valuable? You sit around waiting for the level to come, and then that's it. That's what you get for that level. That and the HP. Oh, right, and you do a d6 extra damage. But this doesn't feel like a big development. I mean, are you really a much bigger person than you were at 4th level? So you get these little piecemeal developments, and then occasionally you get those big, like, hurrah class abilities that you're really, really looking forward to. The point is, the main thing that you're getting most levels, unless you're a wizard and you're getting more spells, is HP. And of course, like, wizards just get less HP. So I'm sitting there looking at this and thinking to myself that the main body of leveling from 1 to 7 is to become this, like, stupid beat stick with tons of HP. And you know what? Jason Voorhees is, like, impossible to kill. So I designed the character to be impossible to kill. They cannot die. If you kill him, he just regenerates. Then I gave him a bunch of damage resistance, so that he doesn't even really take that much damage in the first place. Physical attacks do not stop Jason Voorhees. Then it was like 25 points, or approximately a level's worth of stuff, to make it to where Jason never has to eat, sleep, rest, or anything else. You know, he's immortal. And finally, I gave him 5 attacks. Yeah, 5 attacks at level 7, you heard. Yeah, it's overpowered in the context of 5th edition, but if you were able to just buy whatever you wanted, and you didn't have to go through all these dumb speed bump abilities, and you had less HP because you had resistance to all attacks as it was, then, like, you kind of have some savings there, and you can just put them all into being a slasher villain. Now, this isn't the part that's clever. It doesn't prove anything, and we don't really have a very interesting or effective character yet. I mean, it's just Jason. He doesn't have any skills. I didn't even give him any saving throws. He's got no proficiencies, although he does get a +8 to hit because you can buy that separately in the hero system. But I mean, you would look at this as a D&D player and say, that's too powerful. That's too much power. A character who has nothing but slasher villain energy is too much. Because that is fundamentally the only thing you can do in D&D. Don't try to deny it. That's all the system is trying to do. A build that takes the mask off and just goes, yeah, I'm a slasher villain. It's over the line. But I don't really care about that because I don't really like D&D, and I don't really care what people think is balanced in D&D because D&D is not very well put together. What I do care about is that what we've got so far is not really going to be very interesting to play. Once again, he's a wonderful character to have in the dungeons, but in, like, day-to-day interactions, he's got no skills. He's got nothing really going on. So what would be the hook that would make this an interesting thing to tell other people about? So I had 100 points left over, and I decided that it's worth asking the question of, like, how does Jason know who to kill? In the movies, I don't think that Jason actually makes any distinction, but we're trying to play Hearn, who's going to be a party member, and he's going to have to cooperate with, like, 3 or 4 other people, so how does Hearn know who the actual bad guys are that need to be killed? And I thought to myself, like, Hearn should be really off-putting. Like, when he meets you, he should just silently stare at you, and you're being watched by this serial killer, and it's like, what's he gonna do? I don't know, and then he pets a kitty. So I was already thinking the character should be non-verbal. Like, I don't really want him to talk to people. That's why he was going to be named Hearn. Because at best, I was going to be able to say... So what if, instead of talking to you, Hearn could read your mind by staring at you? He's actually boring a hole directly into your brain. Not just your mind, he can read your soul. He can tell whether or not you're a good person. And the hero system has a rule for this. So I took a power that would make it to where Hearn could read your deep subconscious and everything else about you just by staring at you. So all 100 points, they went into that ability, and like I listed, like, okay, so here's who can't have their mind read, and basically it's like, God. You need approximately 40 wisdom just to even sense that Hearn is reading your thoughts. That's not even gonna stop him, that's just to know he's doing it. And those D&D players, you guys who are like, I know D&D and I know this, or I already hate it, now I hate it worse. You guys don't know anything. But as a person who's GM'd a lot, I can tell you, because I've played in the hero system and it allows this kind of stuff, that a player who can read everybody's mind and have that much information all at once is a nightmare to deal with. You can't hide anything from them, and they'll always remind you, I can read that guy's mind right down to his bones. What does he know? So there's no secrets ever, and that can be a problem. So I threw a little caveat onto Hearn, and it's this. He can't speak or understand any language, not even sign language. He doesn't even really understand gestures. Hearn is like some kind of bizarre, evil, transdimensional spirit or something like that. I don't want to put a pin on it too hard, but he was forced into this meat body, and he's barely able to control it well enough to swing the machete, so he can't really communicate that well on his own. He can understand what you want from him by reading your mind, but when he's reading your mind, he's seeing like the true essence of you. It's not something that he can put into words. If you gave him a piece of paper and you were like, write out what you want, Hearn. First, he doesn't read or write. Second, he would start drawing you like a multi-dimensional picture of the universe, because that's... First I have to explain, before you can bake an apple pie, you must first invent the universe, so I'll start there. Now that's actually a rule that you can buy with the hero system. They have some stuff for that. But then second, I've got a sort of an unofficial rule that you don't really pay for or buy, and that's if the other players realize that I can actually read someone's mind and that I know everything that's happening, I'm gonna retire the character. Now, you wouldn't have to do this in a really good group. In a really good group, you could just be upfront with them and be like, yeah, Hearn can read minds. And then you can have open conversations with the GM about the kind of stuff that you're reading, and good players will not use that out-of-character information. But this is kind of a Munchkin group. It's actually a really Munchkin group. So if they found out that I was reading minds, immediately they would be using out-of-character information and always like looking to Hearn to see what Hearn thinks and what Hearn is going to do before they do anything else, even if there's no rational explanation for it. So in that group, Hearn would have to be retired the second any of the Munchkins figure out what Hearn is able to do. I could play to limit myself and have fun with the concept, but the other players cannot. So I have to keep the ability a secret. It would be between me and the GM. So caveat number 2, Hearn's intelligence is kind of low. So Hearn's not actually very clever, and a lot of what he's doing is motivated based on how he feels about the minds that he reads. Like if he senses that this is a good kitty cat, he pets the kitty. But if it's a bad kitty, then, he throws it in the lake. I don't know what would make a kitty bad enough for that necessarily, but if the GM was just like, oh yeah, this is a really evil cat, then Hearn would just pick up the cat and drop it in the lake and not explain to anyone why he did it, because Hearn can't communicate. So just be like, Hearn, I just watched Hearn drown a cat once. I don't know why he just picked the cat up and very deliberately to the lake with that cat. None of the other cats, just that one. He seems to like the other ones, and they seem to like him well enough. I don't know, it's weird. I mean, you kill the evilest cat on the block, and then you can sense the other cats want sardines, and they keep paying Hearn adventurer money, but Hearn doesn't need to eat or sleep, so Hearn just takes the money and buys sardines and feeds it to the cats, and he's the hero of the cats. And he's got his own little micro-adventure right there that no one else knows about, because Hearn can't talk to people. The Slayer of the Devil Cats! The story only understood by cats, and only for as long as they can remember, which is not long! But Hearn is not motivated by fame or glory, he's motivated by these weird, emotional interactions. And in the context of the game that Hearn would have been in, they had some kind of, god-killing artifact, and so my motive was going to be Hearn is normally unkillable, but, they have this god-killing artifact that Hearn would want to get rid of because he likes being an unkillable force of nature, so his motive for joining the party is, I'm going to destroy this thing. Which was what the party was trying to do, so, it followed the plot. I mean, it followed it better than everyone else's motive, because no one else... They're all Munchkins, so none of them have motives to be doing the adventure. Just they got the artifact, and then someone was like, hey, go through that door, and the party was like, okay. And that, that's how these games often go. But yeah, Hearn would be really motivated to see this through, because this is one of the few things that could kill him, and if he gets rid of it, that's one more thing that could never kill Hearn. So anyway, there are 2 things that I really like about this character from the perspective of someone who does run a game. The first is that Hearn is insanely powerful and unstoppable, except he's actually really, really easy to stop. So as the GM, you can use Hearn to do the Worfing thing, where you introduce a character and you want the party to know how strong this monster is. So the first thing it does is picks Hearn up and then chucks him into the woods. Goodbye, Hearn! And because the party knows that Hearn is the most unkillable guy they've got, they know that this monster is a big deal, and they'll think twice about taking it head on, because they don't want to wind up like Hearn, even though Hearn will come back. He'll get over it, I mean, he's unkillable, but he's gonna have to walk back. This works great for spells and other types of things too, because Hearn doesn't have any, like his stats, aside from his strength, were pretty mediocre. So lots of mind-affecting spells would bring Hearn down, like he could be blinded, he could be disoriented, this and that and this and that. So it's actually pretty easy to disable Hearn if the GM wants to. And again, if a swordsman is so talented that he can just cut Hearn in half, well, Hearn is dead until he regenerates from that, so, like, Hearn gets cut in half, and then the party sees, like, whoa, let's not mess with that guy. It also works for if characters are supposed to be intelligent. I mean, D&D involves a lot of traps, and so one thing that would be confounding to the D&D formula is that Hearn could walk into a room, set off all the traps, and then be fine. But in a slightly smarter game, you could imagine, like, maybe a group of cunning kobolds are setting traps, and, like, Hearn just keeps falling into them, so constantly Hearn is being disabled and has to claw his way out of, like, this deep pit. He's been stabbed with these tiger traps and everything, and, it's a series of humiliations for Hearn. It becomes kind of comedic and also tips off the party to, like, be aware. There are, like, hundreds of traps. So it gives a little bit more life, and the GM gets to spring more things on the party because he knows that this one party member, technically there's no consequences to killing him, so the GM can just beat on Hearn all the time. He becomes more of a comedy thing than a power trip for the player. I find that fun to play if the GM's also having a good time, if we're all having a good time. So the second angle that's really nice for the GM, if the person playing this character is also a good player, is that the mind reading lets the GM drop hints that he otherwise might be having a hard time getting across. Because you're just like reading the mind of the character, and the GM would be like, oh, you come across this interesting thought, and that's like a good hook to get the players to go do something else. Now that's the simple aspect. The even broader implication, though, is that if you have a player who's asking you like more and more about the deep background of your NPCs, because he's actually reading their mind, then you're creating more and more information about them, and the player will ask things like, who are his family? Where does he come from? Like, why is he doing this? And it's funny because you kind of get to communicate all that to the PC without the awkward, like, clunkiness of, like, I don't know, give me an insight check or anything else. It's just like, I read the mind, I know what he's thinking, I know what's going on. And so even though Hearn can't then turn around and tell the party about that and reveal everything he knows, you and the GM, rather the player and the GM, both kind of work together to create more game background, because the player can express interest in certain things about these NPCs, and the GM can then expand on that, respond to it, and develop the characters more. In fact, let's circle back to that thing I was talking about before, where a slasher film, you require the protagonists to be trying to live, like they have to care. So when you play Hearn, and you can just read the mind of the orcs in the room when you walk in, you can find out, like, are these orcs related? Do they have family? Like, why are they in this room? Will they care if I kill them? Like, and then the GM kind of fleshes them out, and these 4 orcs, even though they weren't really intended to be anything, by the player asking questions about their background, because he's reading their mind, they become living creatures. And then maybe the GM feels compelled to actually have them run away and try to get back to their families and everything, because you create a connection for these things. Like, now you're actually a slasher villain if you go out and kill them. So see, this is the funny thing. By using the mind reading, Hearn becomes more like Jason Voorhees, but only if he indiscriminately kills people. If he understands that these orcs have some kind of motive and maybe you're not at a total impasse, then, assuming Hearn follows a moral code, and he has to if he's going to be cooperating with these other party members, then maybe Hearn doesn't want to kill the orcs, and he would solve the problem non-violently. I mean, like, maybe every single encounter, okay, not every encounter, but quite a lot of encounters, you get to know what's going on a lot better, and every dungeon kind of has more meaning. It could just be that maybe the orcs are terrified of their boss or the guy above them, and so it becomes just like the situation with the cats, where Hearn doesn't actually kill every single orc. He looks into their souls and figures out which orcs are good orcs and which orcs are bad orcs, and he picks up the bad orcs and he walks them to the lake and he drowns them. And then he buys sardines for all the other orcs, and he's the orc hero for as long as they can remember that, which is not very long because they're orcs. Or more like, maybe Hearn figures out that guy's in charge, so Hearn walks directly up to the guy in charge and then slashes him into 1,000 tiny ribbons, and all the rest of the orcs are much more willing to throw their spears down because the boss is dead. At any rate, the point is you can ask questions that are otherwise very difficult to know the answer to, and because theoretically the mind reading actually does take time, according to the rules, so you don't learn everything all at once instantly. You have to kind of ask one question at a time. The GM can maybe give you information one little snippet at a time, or say, oh, you stumble into this, and this becomes a very collaborative way to flesh out the world and build on things if that's something that both you and the GM are interested in doing. In my experience, a lot of GMs are interested in doing that, it's just that they get stuck with player groups who don't really show very much sincerity or concern for what's going on around them, and they just don't ask, like, why anybody is doing anything or why they are anywhere. So Hearn, he never sleeps, he doesn't eat, he knows what you did. He's the ultimate adventurer. And though he is actually explicitly designed to be a homeless murderer, the concept is actually less oriented around being a murder hobo than the average player character in a Munchkin group. Being a good character isn't necessarily about speaking in character, just because you have an accent and maybe a gimmick, that doesn't mean that you're being a great player character. A good player character is going to be somebody who asks questions about the setting and helps collaboratively build the world and the game. Even if you find yourself playing a mute serial killer who drowns cats, so long as you're asking, like, who does this cat belong to, and are they going to care, you're building on the game and being a good player. At least in my opinion. So that's it! That's what I got for this one. I hope you guys found it interesting at the very least, and that you have a great week, month, whatever.